From the valleys of Tennessee and breaking through the barriers of perceived reality, you have now crossed over to the Farside. And on today's edition of the Farside, our guest is a remote viewer by the name of Edward Riordan. And without further ado, Edward, welcome to the Farside.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be on your show.
Hey, I'm glad to have you here with us today. Remote viewing has been one of those things that has interested me since I first heard of Major Ed Dames on an Art Bell program. And for those people who might be listening to this program right now, who may not have much information on remote viewing, would you mind just giving us a small overview on what it is and how you became involved?
Sure. Remote viewing is a learned perceptual skill. It's more an art form, really, for acquiring information via perception of a remote target. Target could be a person, a place, a thing, an object, an event, anywhere in time. And the remote viewing protocol, the viewer goes through a process of acquiring a perception and then describing it exactly as it presents itself. The difference between remote viewing and other psychic modalities is that the remote viewer is always blind to the targets, meaning that they don't know what the target is. And that's what really kind of separates remote viewing out from other modalities. But it was designed it was developed at Stanford Research Institute in the early 1970s is when the program began. And they basically brought it under scientific study to not only prove that we could do these things, but eventually how to develop a protocol to teach people how to do it. The idea is that all humans have the natural ability to perceive remote things. Some people have a natural ability, and when you combine natural ability with the learning and the training of the remote viewing protocol, it's called controlled remote viewing, per Ingo Swann, the fellow who developed it, you can have extremely accurate results.
And how did you become involved?
Well, I was always interested in psychic phenomena since I was a young child. But I first heard of remote viewing in the mid-1990s. There was a documentary that came out, I think it was on the Discovery Channel, when it came out at the time, called The Real X-Files, and it was a documentary about the military remote viewing program. And it had all the major players in the documentary. Ingo Swann, who was the natural psychic who worked with Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ at Stanford Research Institute and actually coined the phrase remote viewing and developed the controlled remote viewing protocol that then was taught to the military people in their program. But I saw that documentary when it came out. I think it was like 1996. And became very excited. I couldn't wait to learn more about it. And like I say, Ingo Swann was in there, and Ed Dames, and all, Mel Riley, and all these people who were involved in the military side of it, as well as the SRI side of it. And so in '99, I did acquire the training videos that Dames had put out. Mm-hmm. And I started training on my own, doing the best that I could. I eventually went and trained with him and his training partner at the time, a really great guy named F.M. Bonsall. And I continued training with Mr. Bonsall for about 11 or 12 months. This was in the early 2000s, about 12 years ago or so. And then I just continued on with my own practice and working with different groups of people on projects and that kind of thing. And then got a little deeper involved with it when I moved to Austin, Texas in 2011. And this is kind of a big remote viewing town, which I was very happy about. Hal Putoff, who started the SRI project, he lives here. Another former military remote viewer, Paul Smith, he lived here. I did some training with him as well. And there's a lot of remote viewing activity here, so it helped to kind of take it to another level of the kind of experience that I want to have with it.
When you first began, what was the training sessions like for you?
Well, you mean when I first started, like with the training videos, or?
Yeah, well, with the training videos, when you actually began working directly with other remote viewers to try and hone your skills.
It was really challenging, because what remote viewing teaches anyone who is interested in remote viewing and can get over the learning curve. And what I mean by that is that remote viewing is, you work a target blind, and then you open a feedback photo, and then you get your feedback photo, and you can compare that photo to your remote viewing session. And in the beginning stages, it's exciting, and it's also frustrating, because what happens is anyone who's really interested in learning remote viewing, they learn early on that it takes a lot of practice. It's like any other skill. Mm-hmm. If you want to be proficient at playing the guitar, you have to play all the time to get better. And with remote viewing, it's the same thing. You have to practice a lot, and then you develop your skill over time with a lot of practice. And so there's a lot of, like I say, there's excitement in there when you do find that an actual remote viewing did take place. And it's also can be frustrating, because you miss. Mm-hmm. And when you miss, it's you have to be able to adjust your ego to be able to get over that. In that, what I like to tell people who are interested in remote viewing, or I have a remote viewing meetup group here in Austin, and I'll tell them, that remote viewing can really, if you go into remote viewing with an ego, it'll really kick your butt. It'll just mop the floor up with you, because you see exactly where you're at. So you get your feedback photo, and then you compare it to what you were perceiving. And if a remote viewing took place, you can see where you were actually perceiving information about that target. And if a remote viewing didn't take place, then the individual was in their own imagination, and they were just describing things that they were creating in their own mind. Mm-hmm. And that's the part that can really is tough for the ego, because when the imagination kicks in, and there's images being created in the mind, the individual can, and this can happen in the early stages, and I say it because it happened to me. You can really just become kind of convinced, okay, I got it, I have this image in my mind, I know what it is, and just kind of describe that. And then you get your feedback photo, and it's like, wow, that's not what happened at all. But, for people who are for real remote viewers, and honestly, there's really not that many, because it's a lot of work to, like you say, hone the skill. But what the work entails is learning the difference between a perception and one's own creative imagination. Mm-hmm. And they're two completely different things. And so a large part of the process for the new viewer, or any viewer really, as we continue we're constantly learning. I'm constantly learning every time. It's a never-ending learning process to me. I'll never stop learning, and that's what keeps me going. But a perception and the imagination have a completely different quality to that. And so a big part of learning how to remote view is understanding how the individual. What I like to say is you learn how to remote view, and you spend the rest of your life learning how you remote view. And what I mean by that is learning the difference between what is a perception and what is just the person's own imagination.
Mm-hmm. Could remote viewing, in your opinion, in your experience with it, could it be related to possibly a mild form of, say, an out-of-body experience?
Well, I think that I could speculate on it, but I really don't know. I mean, the truth is we really don't know how it works. And I take some comfort in that because it frees me of being stuck in some belief about how it works.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, with an out-of-body experience, I think it tends to be a visual experience. And with remote viewing, it's not so much a visual experience, it's a perceptual experience. And so in my personal view, I look at the two things very differently. With remote viewing, what is not happening is a movie inside the individual's mind, and they're just watching it and then just writing it down on paper. That's really not what happens. That happens in the movies. You know? They may want to try to portray it that way, but that's not how it happens. You know, when a perception comes in, and the reason that I even do remote viewing and have stuck with it so long and continue to do it is because the experience of obtaining a perception about a remote target, a location or a person or whatever, it has a quality to it that is extremely engaging to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I'm in an actual remote viewing, it's a really amazing experience to have. And a fellow, one of the former military guys, a fellow named Tom McNear, he was Ingo Swann's best student when he was training the military guys, and he did a really brief interview. And he didn't say much, but the things he said were just absolutely profound to me. And he said that one of the things that Ingo Swann was adamant about was that you had to describe what he called the quote-unquote signal line exactly as it presented itself. And that alone, when he said that, it was so profound for me because it's so true in that when a perception comes in, you have to describe it exactly as it is presenting itself. And what I have found is that if I don't, it begins to fade away.
Mm.
And when it fades away, it's kind of like, you're a baby and they're taking the bottle away from you. You know, you're like, no, come back. I swear I'll choose the right words. I'll choose it. I won't get lost in my own imagination. I'll choose the right words. Please come back. Mm-hmm. And so it has a specific quality to it. It's and I think that the difference between what I'm finding is that if somebody has some natural ability, they have the ability to experience a perception. And someone who comes into remote viewing without any kind of natural ability, and even if they go through a lot of remote viewing and they're still having a hard time finding any natural ability, it may be that they're having a hard time actually experiencing the perception part of it. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what I found.
Now, how, listening to you speaking about perception and the signal line, how would you describe the perception part of it and the signal line? Is it like streaming bits and pieces of data through the internet or trying to put together the pieces of a puzzle?
Yes.
It is?
Yes, it is that way. And I'll agree to that kind of loosely because it's very strange. Like, I'll give you an example. There's a lot of phenomena that happens in remote viewing, and as a remote viewer, I'm really interested in the phenomena more than I am the data even sometimes that I may get. And one of the phenomena that I had read about in one of Ingo Swann's books, and he calls it lack of fusion. And what that means is that when the viewer is in the process of attempting to perceive this remote thing, this remote target, it can come in, like you say, bits and pieces that don't really fit together. And he termed it lack of fusion. And I had that experience in one of my videos, and I was so glad that I had captured it on video because it was absolutely fascinating to me to be able to capture it on video and then use it as an example for a lack of fusion. And basically what happened was the target was was a spy headquarters in England. And the building is a donut-shaped building. It looks, just a round building with a opening in the center. Looks like a donut. And as I'm going through the remote viewing, again, I'm blind, completely blind to the target. And as I'm going through it, I'm getting these elements of the donut shape, but I just don't know how to piece them together. So there's a curved thing over here and a curved thing over there and these lines over here, and I just didn't know how to piece them together. So like you're saying, does it come through in pieces like that? It can. It can come through that way. The process, or what the remote viewing, or the controlled remote viewing protocol was designed for, was to help the individual piece everything together by the end. And that's really the brilliance of it, or the great contribution that Ingo Swann gave us. We would be sitting here talking about it if it wasn't for him.
Oh, yeah.
Is to back and engineer this natural ability that we have and put it into a structure to minimize the noise. And what I mean by that is what he would term as, there's a signal to noise factor. And the signal would be when the individual is actually perceiving the remote location, an actual remote viewing is taking place, they are perceiving it, and they're objectifying it correctly on paper or by word of mouth if they're recording it as well on audio or video. And man, I don't even know where I was going with that. Where I got off on a tangent.
That's fine.
What was the question again?
Well, I'd have to see if I can remember the question.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, I get off on a tangent and I kind of lose it. But I was talking about the signal to noise factor.
Yes.
And so the signal would be when the viewer is actually, when a remote viewing is actually taking place. The noise is everything else that is not that. So the noise would be thoughts that come into the individual's mind, their own imagination is trying to fill in the blanks. Could be, environmental factors around, there's somebody mowing the lawn outside, or there's pictures hanging on the wall, and they're subliminally picking up pieces of information from that. And what the controlled remote viewing protocol does is what it's designed to do is lower that noise factor. And it does that by keeping the thinking mind busy with a structure, while the perceptual side of the mind has places to put all of these perceptions in a way that allows it to get deeper and deeper into the what the target is.
Yes.
I hope that makes sense.
It does. In a lot of ways, what you're talking about is a lot like a noise gate for something like the show that we're doing. I have a computer sitting right beside of me. I don't believe you can hear it because of the noise gate. You might be able to, but the fans are fairly loud. Without that, you would just hear it constantly blaring at you, the fan noise. And essentially, you're trying to just get the most important signals while ignoring everything in between.
Right, exactly. Well, what I will say now to that is, like in that circumstance, they want to ignore the things in between. In remote viewing, you don't want to ignore the things in between. And that's where the viewer can get into trouble. What they found was, in order to kind of error trap the process and figure out the signal to the noise, what they did was, and what they taught as a process, was everything that comes into the mind has to be objectified, meaning it has to be put on paper. And in doing so, you can see, not only can you see where the remote viewing takes place and where the imagination kicks in and why, but it also allows the individual after the session to go back and look and see, well, what did I mean by that? Well, how was I trying to describe this thing? There's something in remote viewing protocol, in Ingo Swann term, that's called analytical overlay, or AOL for short. And what that is when an image comes into the mind, that is considered analytical overlay, meaning the analytical mind has now overlaid the signal with an image or a quote-unquote answer. This is what the target is. And they call that analytical overlay. And in the process, the individual learns to recognize when that happens and then basically get rid of it. They objectify it on paper. This is an AOL. This is analytical overlay. I'm getting this image of the Eiffel Tower or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the process, as the viewer becomes experienced, you learn that sometimes those AOLs, that analytical overlay, those images that can come popping into the mind, are the individual's process of trying to understand what it is that they're attempting to remote view. And so, as an example, let's say we'll use the Eiffel Tower as an example. They're going through the process, and boom, here comes an image in the mind, the Eiffel Tower. Well, what am I trying to say? Well, it's a tall structure. It's pointed at the top. It's girdered. It has this kind of meaning to people. That kind of thing. It's a monument. Those types of things. So as the viewer learns the process, they begin to the analytical overlay part of it then can take on a different meaning, because the individual then realizes that they're trying to explain something. They're trying to understand something.
Mm-hmm.
And so the mind is saying, well, it's kind of like the Eiffel Tower. and through the learning process, you learn, well, the target is probably not the Eiffel Tower, and I'm not going to put my money on that. But it reminds me of the Eiffel Tower, And what does that mean? Well, it's tall, it's vertical, it's pointed. It's like the things that I said. It means a lot to the people. It was built, for that culture. All those kinds of things come into play, because when you're remote viewing a target, you have something, and it has a lot of meaning to it, even if it's something small. It has a lot of meaning to it, and what the viewer is attempting to do is not only describe the physical aspects of it, but also what it means. And what I enjoy most about remote viewing is getting into the perceptual part of what the target means. That really interests me. But you may find other viewers who are really good at describing physical things, or some people are really good at describing people. Mm-hmm. Some people are really good at remote viewing the like I'm talking about, the meaning of something. And so, but you find out which one you enjoy most or which one you're drawn to during the process, And if you can have kind of a combination of the three, then you're probably going to get some pretty good experiences out of your remote viewing
mm-hmm.
sessions.
I imagine you could also have some negative experiences if you were to, say, wonder, what is my girlfriend up to right now? I haven't seen her in like a month. She hasn't called me, etc. So you remote view her. that could get you in trouble.
Yeah, that could get you in trouble for a number of reasons. One, if the remote viewer set up a project like that, one, they're front loaded, and so all of their fears and everything would come into
mm-hmm.
play. I mean, that's a great example that you just mentioned, because I think a lot of people don't really understand what remote viewing is in context of what you just said, in that the viewer is always blind to the target. And in doing so, they're not triggered into coming up with information about it. Mm-hmm. Meaning, let's say if in the scenario that you just put forth, the individual wants to remote view their girlfriend and where they're at, all of their emotions and their fears and everything else comes up. All these scenarios then get created, and you may have 2% signal line and 98% fear and imagination and all these other things.
You could also have, well, the other one would be an emotional line. You would have the signal line, and then 98% your emotional line
Exactly.
is interfering.
Exactly. So ideally, if someone wanted to know what was going on with that, you would get a remote viewer who has no idea of any of that stuff and say, hey, I have this target for you. Create a queue, and a queue is basically a question that you want answered, and then have somebody work the target blind, and then try to understand the data afterwards.
Mm-hmm. During all of your time doing this, have you ever viewed anything that has taken you by surprise? As in, you were not really expecting it to be what it actually ended up being?
Oh, you mean getting through the session and getting the feedback?
Well, once you are done with your session and you see the image, or you find out exactly what the target was. Like I know at one point on your YouTube page, you have remote viewed a underwater cave or something, and it has a quite remarkable architecture to it. Were you surprised by the way it looked?
Not really. That's kind of a tough question to ask. I'd say typically when I do remote viewing now, I'm more interested in the experience than the feedback photo or the feedback. The feedback is interesting for me to research, but my favorite part or the rewarding part for me isn't in the feedback. It's in the actual experience of the remote viewing itself. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going through my memories here to find something exciting. I'd say probably the most interesting ones for me were the targets that I worked that were on a atomic level, molecular level.
Huh.
Those ones probably, I'd say, when I got the feedback, I was like taken aback. But in the session, I was perceiving that I was on a molecular level. So when I got the feedback, that was profound. It was profound.
Are there any known limitations for remote viewing? As in, could an experienced remote viewer such as yourself take a giant step outside this physical barrier of life and peer into the past, into the future, the spiritual world, or even an alien civilization?
Yes.
Yes?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah. It's and again, and here's the thing on that, is that remote viewing is not confined by time and space. Meaning that if you're remote viewing something in the past or in the present, it's really no different. The future, for some reason, can be a little bit tricky, and I don't know why. It may be because our own maybe there's something within us that slows us down a little bit. Mm-hmm. But it seems that the accuracy level in present and past seems to be a little more. Well, we can verify it.
Yes.
Let's put it that way. And but as far as alien civilizations or any kind of target, I don't think there are any limits to what we can perceive. I really don't believe there are limits to what we can perceive. Now, exactly the depth of it will depend on how much remote viewing is done on it. Now, let me give you an example. What I wanted to do was to really push the envelope with what I was capable of, and so I came up with an idea of doing like two full days of remote viewing on a target, and just remote view for as long as I could, take a break, take a nap, get something to eat, go back to it, remote view for as long as I could, take a break, and continue on. And the reason that I wanted to do that was because I wanted to see how deeply I could go into the perception if I gave myself that much time to do it. Because the majority of the sessions are going to range anywhere from 30 minutes to 2.5 hours. Which, if you're running into a 2-hour session, that's a long time. It's a lot of work, a lot of mental energy. It's a lot of focus, and it can be exhilarating and tiring at the same time. But I wanted to push beyond that. And so what we did, and I worked this with a monitor, and we did, I think it was a total of about 5.5 hours, 6 hours over the course of a day, with 2 breaks in between, and it did. I felt that it did push some barriers back. If I had any kind of mental boxes, it definitely gave me a bigger box to play with.
With remote viewing, I've always wondered if there were multiple ways to remote view. With Major Ed Dames, I believe at some point, I could be mistaken, that he had spoken of being in a trance-like state. And I was wondering if there are different ways. I know that you draw your information out and you write down what you're perceiving, but are there individuals who go into a deep trance-like state and they are recorded because they're not able to write down or draw, so therefore you have to record their information through audio or video?
Right. The answer is yes. That is typically considered ERV, or extended remote viewing. And they did utilize that technique in the military as well, where the viewer would, like you're saying, they would recline in a chair or lay down, darkened room, get into hypnagogic state. They'd typically have a monitor with them, and they would be recording the session. And then the monitor would say, okay, here we have a target now, what are you perceiving? And then they would, well, I'm getting this, I'm getting that. The monitor could ask them questions or interrogate them about certain information, or, okay, there's a building over there, go inside the building and see what's inside there. So yeah, that technique is used. The difference between ERV and CRV is that if you're going to work with ERV, extended remote viewing, like that, where you're laying back, typically what they would do is they would lay back and somebody would record it, and then maybe they would come out of it and draw some things on paper, write some things down, that kind of stuff as well. The challenge in that, I'll call it a challenge, is that in that state, the imagination can take over. So it becomes it can become more difficult to differentiate between what the mind is trying to piece together by utilizing its ability to combine pieces of information and come up with a new piece of information, or something that is like something, or this represents something, and being able to distinguish between the two, because the person is now laying down with their eyes closed in a deep, like you say, a trance state or hypnotic state or whatever, and a bunch of images can come floating through. And it can be difficult to be able to distinguish what is an actual remote perception and what is just the imagination trying to understand what the remote perception is.
Okay.
And so that's something that that type of technique is, would take a lot of training, a lot of trial and error, and a lot of learning the language. And that a big part of remote viewing that I found over the many years is that you're learning the language of the mind. And it's not like how we're talking right now. You don't sit down and it's like you hear a voice in your head saying, there's a building over there, and there's windows in the front, and there's a red car parked in front. That's not the right language. The language is a fluid and dynamic range of concepts and memories and feelings and all of these other things. It's like a whirlwind, and so the viewer then can access that and then begin to describe it the best way that they can based on this kind of perceptual concept that they're now being presented with. And so if I were laying down with my eyes closed and I was doing it that way, I would probably get, I'd be getting images in my mind and doing all of those things, but it can be hard to control. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And the PRV process allows the individual a certain amount of control to keep them actually in the perception without getting swept in the tidal wave of images and all these other things that come flooding into the mind.
Mm. Okay, that actually makes sense. I was just wondering if, when you're in this trance-like state, if it's more accurate, but now you're setting me straight, because I had just wondered if being in a trance-like state that you are separating yourself from your imagination, that you have opened up a filter and you're filtering everything out, but you are saying it's more likely you're getting more signal to noise.
I'd say that, unless you have a really trained person, like, let's say, like Joe McMonagle from the former military guy, he, I believe, used mostly ERV techniques. And, but he also does, non.
Edward, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, now I can. Your phone went staticky for a minute.
Oh, I'm sorry. Everything okay now?
Yes.
Okay. But Joe McMonagle, he's able to do it very successfully. I'm sure there's other people as well. It just takes an extreme level of discipline to do it that way. That's what I would say about it.
What would you say, you may not want to talk about other remote viewers, but what would you say about an individual, and you may know who I'm talking about, who on a radio show was asked to reach out and remote view the devil, and he claims to have remote viewed the devil? What would you say about something like that? Would you believe that if you are told or asked, if I were to ask you right now, could you remote view the devil on air? Would you be able to do that accurately?
Well, one, I wouldn't do it because I don't work front-loaded.
Yes.
So I wouldn't do it for that reason. Two, it's a target that I probably wouldn't want to have.
Who would?
I mean, not out of fear. But, well, let me answer it this way. I know the individual you're talking about. Without mentioning any names, I'm going to assume that individual did not do any of the remote viewing. And if so, front-loaded, it's more than likely their own beliefs that came out. But here's my thing about because I get this question a lot. Have you ever come up against something that, are you worried you're going to get possessed? And all of these, these types of things, scary targets and that kind of stuff. I have worked some pretty interesting targets. I wouldn't say that I worked anything that was negative, Beelzebubs or, Charles Manson or something like that. Somebody that I really wouldn't want to access. But what I will say is, I can't speak for all remote viewers, but for me, I have some level of internal filtration, self-preservation. And so here's an example. One of the targets that I had done was Billy Meyer, one of the photographs of one of Billy Meyer's photographs of a UFO.
Mm-hmm.
And so I go into the remote viewing, and there is part of the process that happens is that at a certain point as a viewer is going into the perception and attempting to actually get into remote viewing, they have what's called an aesthetic impact. And that means that they have an emotional reaction to what they're remote viewing. And in that one, as I'm going through it, I came upon this very strong feeling that there was a point, whatever this target was, because again I'm blind to it, that whatever this target is, there's only a certain point that I'm going to go up to, and I'm not going to go beyond that point. And it was just presented just like that. Now that you could take that sentence, you know, and I could write a novel about what that means. Because what I was getting was that if I allowed myself to go into what was available for me to go into, I could get swept away in this current and lose myself in this current of information, like a belief system.
Yes.
I could jump into that river and boom, I'd be gone. Not that I'm going to disappear, but I'll be now taking on a belief. And so, and I didn't want to do that. And so, internally, because again, I don't know what the target is. It could have been anything, you know. And so when I hit that point, I was like, there's a point that I don't want to go beyond here. And it's on video. I have that one, you know, luckily I captured that on video. I mean, I have no judgments about the target, whether it's real or not. That's not important to me. But what was interesting was that there's something about that target that has the potential to be all-consuming. And I perceived that and went as close to the edge of that as I could to describe as much as I could perceptually without getting swept away in the current of it. That was really interesting.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, that was a really, really cool experience. There was another one too, and this is kind of on the opposite end of, like, you know, the devil thing. The target was a photograph of a Mayan pyramid. You know, somebody took a vacationer took these photographs. They were down by the Mayan pyramids, and one of the photographs had this light beam, looked like it was a light beam shooting up from the top of the pyramid. And so, the monitor, I had a monitor for that session. Of course, I'm blind to the target. And so I'm going through it, I'm describing, you know, as best I can these perceptions. And what I was getting was this idea. And again, the perception can come through as an idea or a concept, and I'm trying to describe it as best as I can. And the idea that was coming through was like a notice. A notice was being given, you know, like if you receive a notice in the mail, you know, somebody's giving you something that's saying you need to pay attention to this, or you need to go and do this. You know, you're being served a notice, that kind of thing. You know, not like I'm noticing there's a spider on the wall. You know, like somebody's giving you a notice, you know, something to pay attention. And it was just such an interesting thing. And I got, you know, there was a flash of light and all these things, and all that stuff came through in the session. So the monitor then, Jerry Hearthcock, a good friend of mine, he says, well, let's do a movement. And a movement is where you take a piece of the information that has been objectified and perceived, and you want to explore that or interrogate that further. So he says, let's do a movement, and you know, go to the, you know, whatever is giving notice, and, you know, go to what is providing the notice, basically. You got to keep it very neutral. And when I did a movement on that, I had this profound experience of being in front of a very large presence. Wow. That was looking, you know, now aware of me. And I felt as if I was naked. And it wasn't just like without any clothes. It was like all of my own crap, you know, all of my own human BS was completely transparent. You know, I was completely just without any debris of any kind in this presence. You know, And yeah, it was awesome. It was really an awesome experience. Those are the two ones that really come to mind that were very, very memorable.
Yes.
There are a few other ones, but those ones really were pretty cool.
Would you say this large presence might have been what some people may call God, or do you think it was something else?
Honestly, I really couldn't say. I mean, now it's all hindsight and post-session analysis. All I can say is that when I was in that session, in that part of it, I felt as if I was in front of a consciousness that was larger than my waking consciousness as a human being.
Okay.
And it was sobering in that I couldn't lie about anything. I couldn't convince anyone of anything. I had to be just completely pure. In front of it. And
exactly.
Anything else was debris, and it was just getting blown off of me, like in a furnace or something. It was really awesome, really awesome.
Sounds like an awesome experience, one that I would love to experience.
Yeah, absolutely, man, absolutely.
I know you said we've talked about how your imagination can give you false information, how emotions can give you false information, but can a perception come through as an emotion, such as if you were to go and remote view the Ground Zero site in New York, would a perception come across as an emotion, such as from an event, such as what happened on 9/11?
Absolutely, yeah.
It could?
Absolutely, yeah. And in, once an experienced remote viewer who does a lot of practice and a lot of training, and especially a lot of practice, you get to understand the language of the aesthetic impact, the AI, and it provides a lot of information. Like in the, you mentioned the session with that underwater thing off the coast of Malibu.
Yes.
And in that session, as soon as I hit the AI part or the aesthetic impact, or as soon as I started having an emotional reaction, which was I felt like I was enclosed or claustrophobic, and that is what the quality, the feeling of that to me as I was doing it was okay. This is the signal. This is the perception. I'm here, and that allowed me to go further into that. Basically, I mean, I will say this about it is that there is a limit to that, meaning that the AI part of it, the aesthetic impact, is part of the CRV, Controlled Remote Viewing Protocol, in that the viewer wants to become aware of how they're emotionally reacting to the target, so that they can gauge how much of that is influencing what they're perceiving. Meaning that if they're having a very strong but that may not be what they're actually supposed to be remote viewing. And so if let's use the 9/11 Ground Zero thing. If a viewer was assigned to remote view that, and of course they're blind, completely blind, they don't know what the target is. But what does the tasker want to know? What does the tasker want to know? How people felt as they were witnessing it or experiencing it? Or does the tasker want to know who was the mastermind? They're two different things. So a trained viewer then, ideally, may come into the emotional reaction of it first. But you have to be able to ride that fine line and actually get you what you're actually supposed to be remote viewing and not get caught up in that, because you can totally get caught up in that.
Yeah.
Because especially something like that, 'cause there's so much emotion. But I will say to that is, and then this is something again that I've experienced, is that even if it's a traumatic thing, I may or may not go to the trauma end of it. I may be drawn to some other aspect of it, something that's more interesting to me.
Yes.
And then go on that. Or if you have a monitor, they can, or if you self-cue, you can just bring yourself back to, okay, just go back to the target cue. What am I assigned? What is it that the tasker needs to know to get the individual, get the viewer back on to what they're actually supposed to be remote viewing, which is a big thing, because what I've found, and this is interesting to me, is that oftentimes when I'm given a target, I may not describe what the tasker has intended me to describe. I'll describe something that seems a little bit more interesting to me. It's verifiable, but something else is just more interesting, And the other interesting part about it is that I'll move through time to something that's more interesting, and it's called a temporal anomaly. As an example, I have a video up, and the task was for me to remote view this is a new video, actually. The target and the task was to remote view the geodesic dome that was built for the Montreal World's Fair in 1967. The structure caught on fire in 1976 and burned down. So the task was to describe the burning down of the structure. But and of course, I'm blind to the target. I have no idea what the target is. But as I'm going through the remote viewing, I was obviously not interested in the fire part. What I was interested in was the dome itself, and that there was this trolley conveyor, a little train that shuttled people into the side of the dome, which was just the weirdest thing. You didn't walk through the front door. You got on this trolley that was about 30 feet in the air, and it took this roller coaster ride into the side of the thing. And that's what I described. And that's what I described in the session. And so as I'm looking at it, I'm looking at the target and the task, and I'm looking at what I remote viewed, and I'm like, apparently I wasn't interested in the burning down of this thing, but, Buckminster Fuller's design of it with this trolley thing was really pretty weird to me, and that's what drew my attention. But the interesting thing about it as well is that it's a temporal anomaly, meaning that I moved back in time to the World's Fair when there were people on the trolley and taking it in to this, rounded structure. So it then falls into the phenomena of a temporal anomaly, and that's what fascinates me every time. More than, okay, wow, yeah, there's a trolley, and there it is, and there's people on it, and there's a drawing of the dome thing, and wow, that's a great drawing of it. That's secondary to me. What fascinates me is that I moved through time from when I was supposed to and described something else. And that process alone, I call it a phenomena. That's what interests me. That's what keeps me going. Keeps me as I have on my website as an explorer. I consider myself an explorer of this ability. And so I want to experience all the phenomena that I can and capture it on video so that I can look at it after it's over and say, I want to watch and see where this phenomena was taking place, and I want to study it, so that I can go deeper next time, and then have it available for anybody else who may want to take a look at it as well and say, okay, I'm a fledgling remote viewer. What does it look like when someone's remote viewing? And so that they're available for anybody to check them out.
Yes. For the audience that's listening right now, they could be thinking that your temporal anomaly is a form of time travel.
Sure, absolutely.
Would you at any point think that you could hone your skills to a point where you could physically manipulate things in the past through your temporal anomaly?
Well, that's a really interesting question, and it's something that I am fascinated with. I believe that it is possible in the realm that my present self could be influenced by my future self influencing me back in time.
Mm-hmm.
And as opposed to, I'm going to go back in time and and try to convince Hitler to be a nice guy or something like that.
Yeah.
It's something that I just how is that possible? But what I had done, I had done a lot of experiments with this in a couple of years back to try to establish a connection with myself through time. And with this whole quantum theory of entanglement, and you have these split atoms and all these kinds of, they can communicate. Well, I figured I've got a bunch of my own atoms, and if they're going to communicate, more than likely I'm going to be able to communicate with my own. And so I set up these experiments to see how I could do that. And so basically, what I did was I would set up a remote viewing session in the morning, at the beginning of the day. But what I was doing is I wasn't remote viewing like some event or some thing, or whatever. What I was doing was remote viewing myself at the end of the day, remote viewing or remote influencing myself back at that present time in the morning.
Wow.
So I wanted to attempt to basically reach my hand through time and grab a hold of it and establish a line of communication. And so I would do the session in the morning and, again, I'm remote viewing myself tonight, remote influencing myself now. And I would just get whatever was coming through, it could be anything. Hey, when you get to the stop sign over there, wait a couple extra seconds because there's a car's going to speed through or something, you know what I mean? Something like that. And then at night, at the end of the day, I would do a remote influencing session, which is very similar to a remote viewing session, except you're basically not receiving information as much as you're attempting to project it out. And to myself, and I had really interesting results with it. And but it was so intense that I probably experimented with it for maybe about 6 or 7 weeks, and it was extremely consuming, and I just for whatever reason, again, it could be something internal said, okay, man, you're onto something here. Take a break from this. It's not time for this or something like that. But the results were fascinating. And I also did another set of experiments along these lines, and I was using the dowsing rods, if you're familiar with them, the rods with dowsing. And basically what I was working with was that if I'm going to receive an impulse from myself, from the future, it's probably going to be very subtle. And so I need some type of instrumentation that can pick up on very subtle signals. And those dowsing rods are very subtle. If you make a little twitch, that thing is moving, And so the experiments that I had set up for myself, and these were very short time frame experiments. These weren't, 12 hours from now, 3 days from now, a week from now. These were 5 minutes. I wanted a very short increments in time to try to establish a tangible connection. And so what I did was I got a bunch of envelopes, and in half of the envelopes I put little clipped photographs in, and in the other half of the envelopes there was no photograph in them. And I shuffled everything up, shuffled them up for 30 minutes or whatever, so they were all completely random, and I would just randomly select one of them. And so what I wanted to know was, is there an image clip in this envelope or not? It's a yes or no. It's a binary question.
Mm-hmm.
The future, 5 minutes from now, I'm going to know. And so what I was doing was, I wanted, with the dowsing rod, if it swings to the right, it's a yes. If it swings to the left, it's a no. And so what I was attempting to do was that very subtle impulse to go in the direction that I was sending back to myself in the next 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And then after time, I would check the feedback. I would get the answer for whatever. I would check the feedback, and then in 5 minutes, I would do the little remote influencing, and be sending the impulse back. And I had really, really interesting results. Some were really good. I had, strings of really good ones, 7 in a row. I was getting right, and then 5 wrong, and then 3 right and 2 wrong, and then 6 right and 3 wrong, or whatever. It was a little volatile. I think that moving forward in time, there seems to be some kind of volatility. But I think it's something that we're moving towards to be able to do more. I think we're breaking out of time. I really believe that. We're breaking out of the restrictions of time. Otherwise, why else would we even be interested in these things if we weren't able to do them? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Now, Edward, our time here is coming to an end soon. During your time with remote viewing, do you feel that this has opened up your life or even your overall perspectives to other paranormal phenomena?
Well, I would say that I was already open to other phenomena already.
Mm-hmm.
What I think remote viewing has done is put those phenomena into a realistic frame.
Mm.
Meaning that, take remote viewing as an example. It was designed to be specific and not vague. Sometimes it's vague if you're just having a hard time describing something.
Mm-hmm.
But it's designed to be specific, and so if anything, it has given me a point of view of the other things that we can do that we haven't explored yet. That they are more than likely possible. We just have to be looking at them in a very kind of serious scientific point of view,
mm-hmm.
and not through a belief system. The belief system is a box, and then the individual may be bouncing off the walls inside of the box. But if you get rid of the box, then it becomes, how do we do this?
Mm-hmm.
What do we need to explore in order to do this, or do it more, or expand upon it, and get real results, verifiable results, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Now, before we do in this program, I would like to give you the opportunity to discuss anything that you would like to with the audience, such as your website, your YouTube page, and anything that you would like to just discuss.
Oh, thanks. My website is eourviewer.com, and I have most of the videos are up there, not all of them, but most of them, and I also have articles and stuff like that as well. articles about remote viewing and little short descriptions of the sessions on my website. And then I have all of the videos on my YouTube page. It's ER Viewer is my YouTube page. And some are kind of long, some of them are short. And I try to cover as many of the blind protocols that are available, meaning that I have sessions that are double blind, meaning that I don't know what the target is and no one near me knows what the target is. I have targets where I have a monitor. I'm blind and the monitor is blind as well, so we're both that way. I have videos where the monitor selects the target, and so the monitor knows what the target is. I'm blind, but the monitor wants to know something about the target that they don't know already, and so we explore that way. I have ones where I've experimented with how I remote view the different types of targets, meaning I want to explore how I remote view people. So I'll have someone select targets for me of people, and I know the target is a person, so I can delve into that as deeply as I can, or an object, or a location, or an event, or whatever, and explore those things on how I remote view them. Like I say, in my view, you learn how to remote view, and you spend the rest of your time learning how you remote view. And so, that's what I do. I continually explore how I do it, and I love the process. It's very rewarding, and I hope that somebody gets something out of it as well. And I'm really grateful for you having me on your show and giving me the opportunity to even talk about any of this stuff.
It was a great pleasure. And, like I said before, I'm very interested in remote viewing. What is the best remote viewing course out there, in your opinion?
I'd say, in my opinion, the individual is, and I wish I would have had this when I started. And it was very challenging for me when I started remote viewing. Extremely challenging, but luckily these days with the internet and all these things, people have with what is available on the internet, people have a lot more options. I would say if you stick with the controlled remote viewing teachers who are either trained in the remote viewing protocol by Ingo Swann, former military guys, Paul H. Smith, Lynn Buchanan, Dave Morehouse as an example, Joe McMonagle. These guys teach, or some of their top training students, Paul Smith students or Lynn Buchanan students. In my opinion, this is what I have come to from training in the TRV style in the beginning, and then abandoning that and going for controlled remote viewing. Completely, because what I want to do is get as close to what Ingo Swann was trying to convey as possible. I want to get as close to Ingo Swann's definitions and descriptions as I possibly can. And in order to do that, you need to be trained by people who were trained by him, who teach his methodology as close to what they were taught at as possible. Mm-hmm. And I would recommend people to do that. So if you have an opportunity with, like I say, Paul Smith, Lynn Buchanan, or one of their students, I would say you would get the high quality students. I mean, Lori Williams, she's excellent teacher. There's a couple of other else that are out there who do offer. Angela Thompson Smith, she's another one, who offer really quality training. And also, I would also throw this in there as well. If anybody out there is going to train with somebody on remote viewing, they better make sure that the person who is teaching them can actually do it. And if they can demonstrate, even better. But they have to be able to do it. in order to really teach it. I learned that the hard way, and so I give that as advice to people. It's a really quick example. I know we're running out of time, but Lynn Buchanan has a training video out, real short, basic training video. But in the beginning of the training, he does a little demo session, so you can see he can actually do what he's about to teach you. And so don't waste your money on people who can't show you that they can do it. Just don't waste your money. Go and find the legitimate, real people who can actually remote view and learn from them everything you can. Learn everything you can from them.
Exactly. And thank you so much, Edward, for appearing on the program. And it's been quite the enlightening discussion.
Thanks so much. It was a real pleasure. I had a great time speaking with you.
Hey, it was a great honor, my friend. And I wish you well, and I hope you have a great rest of the week.
Thank you so much. You as well.